He's a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. Boris Johnson is a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. Yes, he's a fucking cunt. Boris Johnson is a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. He's a fucking cunt. Boris Johnson is a fucking cunt.
What a strange period of British politics this is, and almost to prove it, I don't think we've ever opened a show with these two before. But I suspect you understand why we've done that, because flicking through the channels last night, I discovered that PJ and Duncan, who of course grew up to become Ant and Dec, have developed a bit of a sideline while presenting this season of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, in holding Boris Johnson and his clown car of a cabinet to rather higher account than most political journalists.
It is all change in Camp Now, though, because yesterday the celebs chose a new leader via the gift of a secret vote.
And that means David's reign is over. But they weren't celebrating.
No.
They didn't have a party. They categorically deny any suggestions that they had a party. And this fictional party definitely didn't involve cheese and wine or a secret Santa.
Evening, Prime Minister. For now.
Westminster bubble, anybody? On prime time ITV, and of course demonstrating that the presenters Ant and Dec managed to move on a sixpence, because the story only broke yesterday evening. If you're not aware of the story, then welcome back from whatever rock it is you've been hiding under for the last 12 hours. Here is Allegra Stratton, appointed by the Prime Minister as a sort of special spokesperson, and she was supposed to be the one that would helm the regular press conferences in that £2-point-something million specially built studio that then got put on ice, and she got shifted off to being in charge of COP26 or something. It's rather hard to keep up, but she was a sort of senior communications person at the time of the clip you're about to hear. This occurred on December the 22nd of 2020, and it refers to a party alleged to have taken place, or it reportedly refers to a party alleged to have taken place in Downing Street, attended by about 40 people. And they think it's funny.
I've just seen reports on Twitter that there was a Downing Street Christmas party on Friday night. Do you recognise those reports?
I went home. Hold on.
Would the Prime Minister condone having a Christmas party?
What's the answer?
I don't know. I didn't.
Wasn't a party, it was cheese and wine.
Just be clear, it's not.
Is cheese and wine all right?
No.
It was a business meeting.
I'm joking.
This is recorded. This fictional party was a business meeting. And it was not socially distanced.
Funny, yeah. 6 minutes after 10 is the time, and of course any hopes that they may have with the benefit of hindsight realise that this is no laughing matter were rather undone on Monday night when Jacob Rees-Mogg stood up in front of the Institute of Economic Affairs, no less, and cracked even more jokes.
I see we're all here obeying regulations, aren't we? I mean, this party is not going to be investigated by the police in a year's time. You are all very carefully socially distanced. We've moved, I'm pleased to tell you, from the metric back to the imperial system. I know you were at least 2 inches away, which is, as I understand it, what the regulations require during the social distancing period.
As comedians often say, I wouldn't open with it, Jacob, but he did. He went there, and he still thinks it's funny. I wonder what you were doing on December the 18th. And I wonder whether you feel today that Allegra Stratton and Jacob Rees-Mogg and all of the cabinet ministers have queued up all week to either endorse or obfuscate Boris Johnson's repeated lies. I wonder whether you feel that they are laughing quite specifically and quite directly at you and yours. 03456060973 is the number that you need. And we find ourselves now in the quite remarkable position of having a Prime Minister who claimed that the party had never occurred, but today he will be called upon to take action against a senior member of his staff who has been laughing about the fact 4 days after the reported party and almost casting themselves, all of them in that room, although, listen, I'm not making excuses for anybody, but the more junior you are in that room, the harder it would have been not to join in. We've all been there, in our 20s in particular. I'm not making excuses for anybody, but you go for the senior people in scenarios like that, and in this case it's Allegra Stratton. I'm genuinely really upset, actually. I have not suffered particularly during this lockdown, but I've had the very difficult privilege over the last nearly 2 years of speaking to people who have. Whether it is people that have buried loved ones after going for months without seeing them, whether it is people who've witnessed or seen or met for the first time their newly born granddaughter through the patio windows on Christmas morning, whether it's people that attended funerals on Zoom. That's the closest I've come to real heartbreak, was one of my very best friends who died towards the end of last year, and we had to conduct almost all of the ceremonies and the celebrations of his life over Zoom, which was not fair. It was not adequate. I daren't check the date, just in case. I daren't check the date, just in case they were at that party. Because if they were, I don't know, something would snap inside me. I have another problem this morning, which is I have been telling you for now the best part of, 2.5 years, precisely what these people are made of. I've been explaining it to you at length and in detail. I have been describing it to you with receipts, chapter and verse. And yet I know today that you may still not be ready to admit what we've done. They laugh about it. I know this will sound odd, and it's coming up to 10 minutes after 10. If you can put a sincere spin on this, not a pretend one. I don't want you to channel Malcolm Tucker or come out like a sort of comedy character. If you can put a sincere spin on this, if you can look the rest of us in the eye this morning and tell us why we shouldn't be apoplectic with rage or heartbroken with misery at the idea of the people who were telling us what to do, not only laughing about it 4 days later, laughing about riding roughshod over all the rules and regulations, but for some reason that Jacob Rees-Mogg clip from Monday night seems to me to make everything worse. A year later, having been court banged to rights, surrounded by his secretly funded cronies in his think tank environment, he thinks and he knows that he is still free to make jokes about it. He's still free to talk with impunity about something that has, I think, cut to the very quick of the country's patience, the country's tolerance, the country's sense of common decency. I have read a little about the Crown Estate having some form of legal exemption from the rules that the rest of the country were required to follow. It would be a little bit like a diplomatic immunity on embassy grounds or something like that. I don't know whether they'll try and wriggle off the hook using that rather recondite reasoning. I don't know whether he'll try and throw Allegra Stratton under a bus. He hasn't sacked anybody yet, remember, not really. Dominic Cummings was sort of squeezed out after setting the bar so unspeakably high for lying to the British public, and again being backed by every single member of every single cabinet that Boris Johnson has appointed. So I don't know whether or not something significant is going to happen today. I don't know what's going to happen at PMQs. We'll be all over it at 12 noon today. And I don't know whether there's anything you can think of currently that would constitute sufficient remorse, that would constitute sufficient response. I genuinely don't. I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything except the people who've broken down on the programme since this nightmare began. And the people who didn't see their loved ones in their final months. The people who put enormously important celebrations and commemorations on ice because they were obeying the rules. The people who possibly were denied the final touch, the final physical touch with their mothers or their fathers or even, God forbid, their children, because they were obeying the rules introduced by Boris Johnson, the rules amplified to the nation by Allegra Stratton, the rules mocked and derided even this week by Jacob Rees-Mogg, a man who thinks nothing of misleading the Queen herself, who thinks nothing of presiding over a proroguing of Parliament, and who even in the last 4 weeks has tried to rip up the only rule book the people of Britain have left to hold their MPs to account, because his mate, Owen Paterson, had been found to have ridden contemptuously all over it. But then I remember that I'm me and you're you, and this stuff really gets to me. Not every day, not even every month, but every now and then the absolutely irrefutable evidence appears in front of you that this is as bad can be, and they are in charge of our country. They are presiding over a masterclass in incompetence, obfuscation, deceit, dishonesty and contempt. And still the polls tell us it's neck and neck. Still the polls tell us it's 50-50. I know why. I think Brian, Nick's last caller, nailed it really beautifully, actually. Incredibly articulate call, simply describing himself as someone who doesn't normally get involved, someone who normally lets it all wash over him, somebody who possibly, although he didn't say this, subscribes to that school of thought we examined in detail yesterday that could be loosely described as they're all as bad as each other. We also, of course, yesterday cautiously concluded, or at least I did, that we should probably retain the parliamentary tradition that prevents MPs from calling each other liars in the House of Commons. I wonder whether that 52-48 ratio that I described to you to distill my own feelings on the matter will shift a little bit when Keir Starmer stands up shortly after 12 noon today and addresses a Prime Minister who wouldn't know the truth if it sat on his head. Or maybe that's not fair, of course. Because the worst liars are the ones that know they're lying. There's a weird sort of delusional pathology to the liars who are so far down the rabbit hole of self-deception, they don't even know what the truth is anymore. There's plenty of them in the current cabinet, but I don't know whether Boris Johnson is one of them. All I know is, right now, today, they are dedicating every ounce of energy that this country's political establishment possesses to trying to protect the Prime Minister and his closest aides. They should have been talking to you about new walking clinics. They should have been interviewing Sajid Javid. He wouldn't come on this show, but he should have been on Nick Ferrari's show. He should have been on every other show in town today, telling you about new walking clinics, really putting some oomph into the booster regime, really giving information about how you, if you're worried about it, can get that vaccine into your veins. But they don't think that's as important as closing ranks around Boris Johnson, circling the wagons and trying once again to pass off his lies to the British public. They did it at Barnard Castle. They'll do it again today. Will they get away with it? 0345 60 60 973. I think I've been doing this job too long to feel much optimism that the pendulum will slowly swing back to where we were before and people will come out of this claiming that he's doing his best or he's being treated unfairly or, oh, thank goodness, he's in charge because Jeremy Corbyn would have been even worse. I genuinely don't know what life raft you would cling to as you're tossed about by the flotsam and jetsam that passes for a government in this country. What are you clinging to? Tell me. I'll try not to have a row with you today, although I warn you, my dander is high. How do you cling to it now? You put your trust in this man. Forget the B word for now. You put your trust in him. And he surrounded himself with people who laugh at you. And a word, if you don't mind, before we hit the phones, on hypocrisy. Just a short word on how viciously right-wing newspapers and the far-right hate sites went after every government advisor or every Scottish medical officer who were found to have breached regulations that they were in charge of introducing. And if you need any further evidence of Keir Starmer's increasingly pertinent accusation, one rule for them and another rule for the rest of us. Just look at what the forelock-tugging quarters of the British media are doing today. Just look at what the cap-doffing quarters of our country are doing today. But I think today it won't actually work. Despite the Sun leading with energy chiefs felt the heat yesterday after blaming the power cut crisis on the wrong type of wind. Amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing, except not remotely amazing at all. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Sarah is in Dursley in Gloucestershire. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning. I'd just like to say that I think today this situation that we've woken up to this morning could be a turning point for the public in this country.
Do you?
I work for the NHS and you asked what we were doing on December the 18th last year. Last year, I was working a 12-hour shift and our Christmas party had been cancelled. My son's Christmas party had been cancelled. My partner's party, everything had been cancelled. Christmas dinner had been cancelled. Everything had been put on stop because of what the government had said to us and the restrictions that we were living under at that time. And to hear this now today and to hear them laughing, I saw the video late last night on the news, of the lady that was the
Allegra Stratton.
Allegra Stratton, that's right.
Yes.
And I thought it's just unbelievable that they actually think that the public are going to accept that.
Is it? Let me just pause you briefly, if I may, and play the devil's advocate, if that's all right with you.
Mm-hmm.
You know that doctors deal with such traumatic events that they develop sometimes very, very dark comedy to keep themselves almost detached from the reality of what they're dealing with. Is there any argument at all that these people were so close to the heart of the action that they insulated themselves from the horrors by adopting a light-hearted approach?
Absolutely not.
No, you're absolutely right. I can't believe I said that. What an absolute idiot I am this morning. That's just because it doesn't matter about the laughter afterwards, does it? It's the fact that they had the party that is, the original offence. To laugh about it afterwards is just unbelievable. What would look like a satisfactory response to you from Boris Johnson today? Because he's not very good at satisfactory responses, but he can usually rely upon large swathes of the country to cheer him to the rafters even while he picks their pockets.
I mean, I did also hear the video, the talking by Jacob Rees-Mogg about...
he still thinks it's funny. He still thinks it's funny that people are cross about this, and so do all the ghouls that work for the Institute of Economic Affairs.
I don't think it's funny that people weren't able, like you've said several times this morning, and so has the earlier shows this morning, I've been listening all morning, that people weren't able to say goodbye to their loved ones. People weren't able to spend time at Christmas with their loved ones before they unfortunately became victims of COVID and other illnesses and other situations.
How can you find it funny? How can you find it funny?
You can't find it funny. It's not funny at all. And like I said at the start of when I came on, I think today may be a turning point for this government. I think it's high time that this government started listening to the people that are voting for them, listening to the people.
Did you vote for them? Do you mind me asking?
I did actually.
Okay.
I've always voted Conservative, and I won't be voting Conservative anymore. The only thing I would add to that is if there was and I'll probably get crucified for this, but if there was a stronger opposition, I would probably vote for that instead, because I've always voted Conservative, and I always used to be very proud to say, but enough is enough. I always used to be quite proud to say I voted Conservative. My family I come from a services background, and I was always quite proud to say that I voted for Conservative.
It's in your DNA, and they've robbed you of that, I think. They've robbed you of that. But
now, absolutely, I would not vote for them again. I think there are a bunch of...
Well, let's see whether Keir Starmer cometh the hour, cometh the man. Let's see if he can impress you a little more than he has managed to already with his response to this. I can't fault a single syllable you said, Sarah, actually. I look forward to talking to you again. It is being pointed out by Owen Jones this morning that James Slack, after I just pointed out that the Sun newspaper today decided to lead on power company bosses blaming the wrong kind of wind for some of the power cuts recently. James Slack, who's currently very, very high up at the Sun, was at the time Director of Communications at Downing Street at the time that this party took place. I don't know whether you're bored to death of me telling you how closely linked they all are, but it's no coincidence that Rees-Mogg was at the Institute of Economic Affairs on Monday. And here is just a little bit. I'm never quite sure what I can and can't say about them, but I can read you a report on the last time they tried to complain about my descriptions of them. The Institute of Economic Affairs has lost a 2-year battle with LBC radio presenter James O'Brien over claims the registered charity is a politically motivated lobbying organisation funded by dark money. The IIEA complained to media regulator Ofcom that the radio station had made a series of inaccurate and unfair suggestions that the organisation is a professional lobby group of questionable provenance with dubious ideas and validity, staffed by people who are not proper experts on their topic. The free market think tank particularly objected to O'Brien's dismissive description of an IEA representative as some Herbert, as well as guest Peter Gagan's suggestion that the IEA was politically biased during a discussion on the funding of think tanks. And who did Jacob Rees-Mogg confidently conclude would be a willing and appreciative audience of his invitation to laugh even more at the people who were partying at Downing Street while the rest of the country was under lockdown? It was a room full of Herberts from the IEA. Bridget's in Poole. Bridget, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Good morning. I'm actually calling from Paul crematorium. We are having a ceremony for my father-in-law at 11 a.m. and I strongly believed he died this month from his leukemia because of delays in his care due to COVID. You know, his life was cut short. And it is beyond me that the elite that run this country are laughing at us for the sacrifices we've made over the last 18 months. And the previous caller, Nick Ferrari, got it right. They think they're better than us.
Brian.
They are not just metaphorically, they are literally laughing at us. And to me, it feels like it's this kind of Etonian divine right to rule. You know, they are better than us. The rules don't apply to them. And, you know, the truth is the only way we have a degree of normality back in our lives now is because we all did follow the rules. You know, social distancing, masks, it worked. And that they can't lead by following those rules is beyond me.
And then compounded on Monday by Rees-Mogg actually laughing about the rules that you correctly describe as having saved us all from even more tragedy and death.
Yeah.
How can that be funny? How can that be funny, Bridget? How can he make jokes about social distancing in December of 2021?
No, it's beyond me. It's beyond me, and I hope that Keir Starmer can make an impact today, because I don't know what else that we can do to remove these people.
He owes it to all of us, and I hope that you can give your father-in-law a decent send-off, Bridget. But my condolences to you and all of your family on this horrible.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Keep doing what you're doing, because I feel that this is the channel that will hold this government to an account, and if we.
Don't forget about Anton Deck. Don't forget Anton Deck have taken the lead overnight.
Amazing. Yeah, they're on it. I love it.
It is great.
Heroes.
Yes, I mean, but, you know, they're normal lads, happen to be immensely successful, but they're family men dealing with this, having family at the other end of the country, limited from seeing them, limited from visiting them, feeling very keenly what the rest of us feel. And what I think even I, as Bridget's kind enough to point out, a relatively accurate critic of this clown car of a cabinet, this clown car of a government, even I struggle now to quite get my head around the fact that they were laughing. I worked with Allegra Stratton very, very briefly. In fact, so briefly, the only thing I can remember about working with her was her leaving speech at BBC Newsnight. So I've got no beef with her, no personal knowledge of her, but they're very closely interlinked. I think her husband is Rishi Sunak's best friend. The Spectator magazine inevitably sort of looms over all of these internecine relationships like a dark shadow or a bad smell. The think tanks are there. I mean, there is just this sense of, I'll use the word cabal, I think, a sense of a cabal that truly believe not only are they born to rule, but also that they are better than the rest of us. And I would be fascinated to hear someone challenge that conclusion, whether it's Bridget's analysis or mine or Sarah's or anybody else's. You can challenge the conclusion today that they truly think they're better than you. And you know what follows now, because you've heard me point it out several million times. A large proportion of the population agree with them. The Jacob Rees-Mogg fan club agrees that Jacob Rees-Mogg is somehow better than them. Go back to John Cleese and the Two Ronnies and that famous Know Your Place sketch. Absolutely nailing British society. And if you're genuinely mystified by much of the current political landscape, this is one of the most effective skeleton keys to unlock your confusion. It's not just that the people at the top of the pyramid truly believe that by dint of birth or genes or background, they are better than you and better than me. It's the people near the bottom of the pyramid who hold it up by agreeing, which is why you hear me, probably a little more often than is healthy, refer to the forelock tugging and cap doffing that typifies so much of this country. I wonder whether that breaks today. You've been tugging your forelock since 2016? Good old Boris, he's doing his best. And now you've heard his top people laughing at you. Laughing at you. And Rees-Mogg this week is still doing it. That's what I mean by impunity. That's what I mean by the cabal. They only ever really encounter people who are part of the same morally corrupt mindset We are better than you. Pick your favourite moment. Was it Barnard Castle? Was it the proroguing of Parliament? Was it Owen Paterson? Was it Rees-Mogg lying down on a bench in the House of Commons like he was at a Roman orgy? What was it? How much evidence do you need that they think you are, to use a word that has appeared in political parlance relatively recently, although Angela Rayner has expressed deep regret for using it? I won't. They think you are scum. I know it was the Frost Report, but it was the two Ronnies and John Cleese that were in the sketch about the British class system, albeit I grant you that they weren't, at that stage in their careers, perhaps widely known as the two Ronnies. But I digress. Here is a tweet from gov.uk, the government's own Twitter account, providing support for users of the gov.uk website. It is, if you like, the portal to official government guidance. And here's a tweet from December the 17th, 2020. Although there are exemptions for work purposes, you must not have a work Christmas lunch or party where that is a primarily social activity and is not otherwise permitted by the rules in your tier. You can find more information here. December the 17th. December the 18th, the party purportedly took place. There was also, according to Private Eye today, a big party at the Sun newspaper as well on December the 18th, which might explain why they're treating you like idiots as well by not focusing upon this story for fear of being fingered themselves. And then, fast forward to December the 22nd, when a press briefing rehearsal was being held by the woman who was then Boris Johnson's official spokeswoman, a job that sort of kind of dissipated and dissolved as the months passed, and perhaps her performance here provides an indication as to why. So this is the December the 22nd press conference rehearsal presided over by the man that Boris Johnson believed was the best placed human being in the country to channel information from government to population.
I've just seen reports on Twitter that there was a Downing Street Christmas party on Friday night. Do you recognise those reports?
I went home. Hold on.
Would the Prime Minister condone having a Christmas?
What's the answer?
I don't know.
It wasn't a party, it was cheese and wine.
Just be clear, it's not. Is cheese and wine all right? No. It was a business meeting.
I'm joking.
It is recorded. This fictional party was a business meeting. And it was not socially distanced.
I'm never entirely sure whether people claiming not to see the rabbit are acting in good faith, but I'm just going to play you the very beginning of that again. And if you're really claiming that there's no smoking gun or that there's nothing to see here, and I don't think you're doing it seriously, I think perhaps it's a bit like Pavlov's dog. I think glancing at my inbox, maybe one or two people, and much, much fewer than usual, cannot help but respond. It's as if I hit your knee with a hammer and you've got no control over your leg going up, saying, must defend Boris Johnson, must defend Jacob Rees-Mogg, must defend Allegra Stat. You've kind of got no control over it at all. But the question asked by Ed Oldfield, who's still a broadcast media advisor to the Prime Minister and almost certainly had knowledge of the party the previous December the 18th, 4 days previously. If there had been no party, then the purpose of the rehearsal would be achieved by Allegra Stratton, Boris Johnson's official spokesperson, simply saying there was no party. What are you talking about? So the only explanation I've got for why they're all laughing in the room is that they all knew. And, of course, the more you listen to it, the more layers appear, because she didn't appear to Rich. She genuinely appeared. And you watch the footage, you get an idea of whether or not this is genuine ignorance or something a little more performative. I think she genuinely thought there might be a possibility that a cheese and wine party had some sort of exemption, as opposed perhaps to a sit-down dinner. So it's not just the contempt with which she treats us, it's not just the contempt with which she treats the facts, it's the fact that she doesn't appear to know what's going on. And remember, the man that appointed her is the same man that appointed Dominic Cummings. He also made Sajid Javid Secretary of State for Health. And quite why Sajid Javid pulled out of all interviews this morning is a question that perhaps only he can answer. It's worth speculating briefly. Have they all refused to stick up for him in public this time? Or is there something less obvious unfolding behind the scenes? I'm reminded of that enormous delay when Dominic Cummings was due to come into the Rose Garden to lie to you about his trip to Barnard Castle. And I presume that enormous delay involved lawyers paid with your money going over every dot and crossed T of his statement to make sure that, despite being an absolute farrago of nonsense and lies, it would be legally watertight. So I suspect that's what's happening now, as we speak, prior to PMQs. I suspect they're looking for some sort of political prophylactic that could prevent Boris Johnson from being held banged to rights by the events that have emerged over the course of the last week. And once again, the fact that Jacob Rees-Mogg was still laughing about it on Monday almost beggars belief. Even I struggled. I saw the accompanying text to the clip, and I thought, I'm just going to watch that clip, because it can't be as bad as the text suggests. I think it was probably worse, especially when you established the company he was keeping. A hard-right lobby group for vested interests of big business, fossil fuels, tobacco and junk food, is how I described them. That was one of the many things they complained about and failed after a 2-year battle to sustain. But of course, you'll only need to turn on your radio tomorrow or open your newspaper today, and there'll still be people turning up from these mysteriously, secretly funded think tanks who are treated as honest brokers. Some of them work in Downing Street. They work in Downing Street now. They moved from the Taxpayers Alliance into the Downing Street communications team. So I don't know quite how anyone can be surprised by what is going on here today. However, I am ready to be surprised by how they try to wriggle off the hook, because right now I can't see it. 03456060973. I've got 2 phone lines free for the first time since 10 o'clock this morning. If you want one of them, you know what to do. Paul has picked up his phone this morning. What would you like to say, Paul?
James, hello. Firstly, my apologies to you and to your listeners if my voice is a bit shaky, but I am so angry about this. Because
you don't need to apologise. You're in good company, Paul.
On the 18th of December last year, I had to go to my aunt and say to her, you can't come to lunch this year. Now, I know in comparison to some people who have lost loved ones, that may fade into insignificance in a way. But my wife and I spent last Christmas visiting elderly neighbours who were on their own, who, like my aunt, were unable to share time with their families, with their loved ones. And then you listen to the laughter yesterday. And just an aside to that, you listened to Raab yesterday coming out and saying about the guy who came out about Afghanistan, well, he was only a junior member of the team. There is a sense of entitlement that runs through this government that I have never known in any Conservative government prior to this. Now, maybe that's me just being a bit
I don't think it is. I actually agree. I don't know where you stand on voting in the past, but I agree.
I'll tell you
with
if I may, James.
Yeah, of course you may.
I'll tell you if I may. Sorry to interrupt you. I always voted Labour.
Right.
And at the last election, I voted for this guy.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm annoyed with myself about that, because the truth is, James, I knew what this guy was like, because I'm from London when he was London mayor and everything else. And you turn a blind eye to one thing, then you turn a blind eye to another. This, for me, is the line in the sand.
Is it?
This is it for me now. Yeah.
Is it the laughter? Is it the fact that they had the party, or is it the subsequent laughing about it? If that's not a crass question, I'm just interested in what landed harder.
No, it's not. It's the laughter, and it's the party and the sense of entitlement that it doesn't matter who in government. And that's why I mentioned Raab again yesterday. It's because it was almost as if he was saying about this guy who came out, well, he's just a junior member of the team and everything else. Well, you know what? The guy who was due to be in charge of the Foreign Office at that time was on holiday for over a week.
Yes, he was.
You know, and it is just this sense of entitlement that goes through that entire government.
And they'll try and pin it. They'll try and pin it on civil servants. But in fact, one newspaper already is trying to pin it on civil servants. But they work for Dominic Raab, and Dominic Raab can't really demand that a senior civil servant comes back from holiday if he's paddleboarding off the coast of Crete, can he?
But, James, we need to get back to something in this country, whatever line whether we're Conservative, Labour, whatever we might be. And I'm going back to Labour now, I can tell you. Okay. Do I find Keir Starmer at the moment to have the policies necessarily that I want? Maybe not at the moment. But to pick up on something one of your earlier callers said, if there was a stronger opposition, I would vote for them.
Well, he'll be listening to this with deep concern, I think. As you point out, you're not the first to say that. And what do you mean by stronger, Paul, just out of interest?
Well, I mean, it just seems to me at the moment when a Labour politician comes on to talk about sort of anything that's happened in recent months or weeks, and the interviewer will say to them, well, what would you do about this? And most of the interviews I've seen, and I'm happy to be put right on it, but most of the interviews I've seen, you usually get the Labour person say, well, you know, we need to sort of, you know, we've got 2 years until an election. It'll be in a manifesto.
Whereas you need a menu. You need a menu with different choices.
I want alternatives now. But James, the point I just want to end on, if I may, is
of course you may.
Even if Labour don't have necessarily the policies that I would want, what it's about for me now is about having politicians with integrity, with honour. Because it doesn't matter, as I said, what our politics might be, we are better than this. And I don't know how we've fallen so low. I
voted differently at the last election. I mean, you actually voted for Andrew Rosendale, but we'll save that conversation for another day after his comments regarding universal credit. But I don't know quite how we've fallen so low either. And the explanations and the theories I've put forward so often. I won't patronise you or anybody else by putting them forward again. But there has to be some sort of assault upon objective truth involved in what you described, Paul. There has to be some sort of abandonment of old standards. And I will allow myself one glance in the rearview mirror and the mindset distilled by callers who say things like, I know he's awful or I know he's lying, but I love it because it upsets people like you. That they, I think, are the people that are going to have to lead any rapprochement that is possible. That's just my view as well, but it's not as actually passionately expressed as yours, Paul, and I thank you for that. And I don't think there's any apologies needed for your aunt being left on her own at Christmas, because we all have the receipts for what we did when we abided by the rules. We've all got the receipts. Some are going to be big ticket items, some are going to be relatively small ticket items, although the idea of an elderly lady being on her own on Christmas Day is, to my mind, not trivial. And they're still laughing. Not just back on December the 22nd, 2020, but in Jacob Rees-Mogg's case at the Institute of Economic Affairs, still laughing on Monday. A lot of you, I mean, judging by texts and emails, and it's not a phone-in topic, I don't think, because it's a little bit, of a beauty contest or whatever the opposite of a beauty contest might be, an ugliness contest. A lot of you seem to be even angrier about Jacob Rees-Mogg still laughing about it this week than Allegra Stratton laughing about it last year. Ricky writes, the laughing Jacob Rees-Mogg video is much worse than Allegra Stratton's. Just look at the company he keeps during that speech. The Hard Right Institute of Economic Affairs, friends and lobbyists. Well, yeah, I had my own run-in with them, so I am slightly qualified to comment on the nature of the company that Jacob Rees-Mogg elected to choose for his jokes about the necessity of investigations into illegal parties held at Downing Street. 10:51 is the time. Are you the same as me? Do you still, even now, we've been on air for 51 minutes, give or take. A few clips of PJ and Duncan singing Ready to Rumble, but we've been on air for more or less 50 minutes. And I say the words out loud, and there's a little bit of me, because you have to self-edit when you're doing this for a living. I know what you're thinking. Really? I look forward to noting some evidence of that, James. But you do have to. So I say the words out loud, and there's a little bit of me that thinks, really, oh, crikey, have I just done something right? They didn't, did they? What? No, but they really did. I wonder whether we need occasionally just to remind ourselves of just how egregious this is. And I think it's fair to say, again, it's not a beauty contest. I think the laughter 4 days later has landed harder than the party did. And I think I understand why. I think it's because we're a decent bunch and nobody's perfect. And maybe you can just about get your head around a gathering. Maybe you can, I don't know. But the idea that 4 days later you'd find it all so hilarious is, I'm afraid, absolutely beyond defence. I think so anyway. Ashley's in Glasgow. Ashley, what would you like to say?
Hi James. You were asking about December 18th last year.
Yes.
So December 18th last year, I was 4 days into my first post-registration job as a staff nurse.
Good grief. Talk about in at the deep end.
Yep. I had started on the Monday, and on the Tuesday morning we were a COVID ward.
Wow.
I, on December 18th, held a woman's hand as she died, as her family couldn't be with her because she had COVID. I had never seen a patient die during my training. This was my first patient death. And I watched her die, scared and alone. Yeah. And then I stood up and put water on my face and went back out and did more. I left maternity leave 4 months early to go and help the effort, if you like. And that night I came home and couldn't hold my 5-month-old baby until I had boiled my clothes and showered.
Yeah.
And
that was
I think about her every day.
Oh, on the actual 18th?
On the 18th, yeah. I was 4 days into being a nurse.
So the date is burned in your memory, isn't it, for the most...
Yeah. I actually suffered from nightmares for weeks.
I'm sure you did.
Because my actual... Despite having never actually seen a patient pass away before then, my actual special interest was in helping the dying.
Yeah.
And my philosophy is always that nobody should ever be alone, nobody should ever be scared, and nobody should ever be in pain. And she was in all three. So
well,
it's the idea that they're laughing, unless they're going to make that phone call, unless they're going to sit and hold and watch somebody as they are essentially suffocating.
How can they be so far removed from your reality? It's almost beyond my ken.
I worked out the other day that if I earned hourly what the Prime Minister earns, I would have to work one shift to earn what he earns in a month.
And the communications
and he's never had to make
and
that
official
phone call.
spokesman won't be far behind. Can I say thank you to you for being you? Would you mind? Because that was a beautiful thing you did and a beautiful thing you said. And I know it haunts you, but that old lady could have been even more alone if you weren't there. So thank you for being you, Ashley.
Thank you. But yeah, unless he's going to make that phone call, unless he's going to hold their hands,
And
please
tell
don't
them.
ever laugh at us.
No.
Because
I mean, and
the
it
phone
is...
calls that we make, currently daily, even though I'm no longer a COVID nurse, the phone calls I'm making daily hurt me. And you're laughing because people are not coming into hospital because they're scared to pass things on.
There's three fronts here this week, isn't there? There's the lie, there's the party, and then there's the laughter. The lie, the party, the laughter. It's quite hard to unravel them, but the laughter is like the final thrust of obnoxiousness, isn't it, against this backdrop of appalling callousness and contempt and arrogance. But the party, and then the lie, and then the laughter. It's an incredible...
My daughters are under 4 and they can't have a Christmas party.
This year?
My daughters are babies. They're still not having Christmas parties. My youngest has actually never been to playgroup. Because of where I work, I've tried to be so careful. She hasn't interacted with any children her age because I'm trying to be so careful.
I have tried to be so careful. I have tried to be so
I didn't
careful.
see my dad during cancer treatment because of where I work.
Because you were terrified of taking it
Because
back into
he
the
had
hospital?
no immune system during his treatment.
Of course, right.
And
You just
they
don't know.
can't even stand up and say, we did wrong and we're sorry.
No.
That's all, see, for me right now, that's kind of all it would really take right now to make me feel a little bit better.
Sorry.
Stand up and say, we did it and I'm sorry and we were wrong.
Would that help? Because it's gone on so
Right
long and the
now?
denials and the... I mean, I suppose what you're describing to me is any port in a storm almost, aren't you?
Yeah, right now,
You're such a good person.
just as a little tiny starter,
Yeah.
just even the acknowledgement that they've done wrong. I
More than
learned during
wrong.
training that what most people look for when the NHS makes mistakes, and the NHS makes mistakes, we do, what most family members are looking for is acknowledgement. Just that, yep, I'm really sorry, we messed up, and we're sorry. And if the NHS can manage to do that, why can't the person who is essentially in charge of all of the departments that run the NHS, why can't he just stand up and say, yep, I'm sorry.
How could it not land? And by then, of course, he'd been in intensive care himself.
Yeah.
He'd come, people say, I think it'll change him. I think he'll come out with a lot more compassion. I think he'll come out with a lot more empathy because he knows how serious it is. And yet...
But he won't even wear a mask in a hospital.
And the people working closest to him were confident that they could have a party. I think that's important. You know, he didn't attend himself, as far as I'm aware, not this one, although there was another one that's dropped off the radar a little bit. But you'd have to be pretty confident, wouldn't you, that your boss wasn't going to go absolutely ballistic to have a party in his... Well, the building is both his home and his office, isn't it?
It's just, yeah.
I say thank you again. Ashley, and I mean it, and I know everybody listening to this means it as well, and without people like you, God knows how much worse the horrors that everybody has endured to varying degrees, or at least I thought everybody had endured horrors to varying degrees. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Allegra Stratton and co. seem to be having a high old time, even now finding it all hilarious. But for decent people, what you've done and what you continue to do makes everything better. And some days it must feel to you as if all you're doing is making things less bad, but even that is incredibly valuable to the people in the front line of suffering. So thank you again. 10:58 is the time. I'm going to squeeze in Simon in Chesham, if I may, because I think rather than bringing testimony to the table, Simon, you just want to vent your spleen a bit, so I can give you a minute to do so.
Right, I'll squeeze it in, James. The Jacob Rees-Mogg clip is the one that's tipped me over the edge. It reminds me very much of kind of thinking back to school days and seeing a school bully operating in the playground and surrounded by his cronies in a circle, and right in the middle is that child who's been bullied. They're laughing at him, they're sneering at him, they're looking down their noses at him, and this child has done nothing wrong. And it just struck me as I thought about that child represents every single one of us who has played by the rules over the last nearly 2 years. Every single person, as we've been hearing on your show already today, has watched on helplessly as a loved one has died. You know, I watched my dad die. We couldn't go in to see him during the first lockdown for many, many days. It was hugely stressful. Thankfully, in the end, one by one, we could go in. But he, Mogg, and his cronies are looking down their nose and sneering at people like me. They're sneering at the kids, as we've just been hearing, who carry on missing out on life events, missing out on education.
I'm joking now about social distancing and masks. Even now, and I don't think they were required to wear masks or to social distance in the room that he was in on Monday night. But to make jokes about it is... well, crikey, I thought that I was a bit of an... as Daddy Pig would say, Simon, I thought I was a bit of an expert at the moral corruption of this crowd, but I'm still, we've been an hour into the programme now, I'm still genuinely reeling. A lot of you have obviously tuned in a little late and want to hear the Rees-Mogg clip again. That's absolutely fine by me. You know me. I keep all the receipts. And here he is on Monday night speaking to the secretly funded so-called think tank. I think they describe themselves as an educational charity, which, of course, lost a 2-year battle earlier this year with me over claims that it is actually a politically motivated lobby organisation funded by, quotes, dark money, end quotes. And that's the crowd Rees-Mogg chose for these hilarious jokes.
I see we're all here obeying regulations, aren't we? I mean, this party is not going to be investigated by the police in a year's time. You are all very carefully socially distanced. We've moved, I'm pleased to tell you, from the metric back to the imperial system. I know you were at least 2 inches of regulation, which is, as I understand it, what the regulations require during the social distancing period.
I don't understand how that's funny, actually. I mean, genuinely, sometimes when you're doing public speaking, the room has a kind of bounce in it. There's an energy in the room. Most obviously, I think if you're giving a best man speech, you've got a very friendly audience. It's not like being a stand-up comedian walking out onto the stage at the Comedy Store shortly after midnight with a crowd full of stag night groups. I mean, the best man speech is always the one I use to explain to people the difference between a warm audience and a potentially difficult audience. So maybe it's a bit like a best man's speech audience when Jacob Rees-Mogg turns up at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Maybe they're going to laugh at whatever material he serves up. But I just can't quite see how that is even remotely funny. You get a gag sometimes when you simply refer to something recent, because it has a sort of ring of familiarity and everybody wants to demonstrate that they know what you're talking about. So if you do a joke when you're doing an event about something that happened that day, then you get a bigger laugh than you would if it had happened a week ago. Okay? That, I think, is a form of advertising subconsciously to the room that you know what the joke is about. So you get that sort of comedy. Maybe it's that. I don't know. But I have to be honest. That's just... I mean, it's a weird combination of pathetic and gross, isn't it? Which I suppose sums up most of his public contributions. 11:11 is the time. Back to the phones. Question stays the same, I think, today. I'm not minded, really, to move it on much, except possibly to introduce an element of competition between these events. There is the party, there is the lie, there is the laughter, and then there is Rees-Mogg. And then the thing I'm not ready to get stuck into yet, because it's I have to be careful. It's one of the main reasons. Why have Ant McPartlin and Declan Donnelly found the tools with which to hold this Prime Minister to account, while household name broadcasters, particularly perhaps on the commercial side of the fence, are still struggling to get their forelock out of their hand? I mean, that's incredible, actually. Everyone's grown up with Ant and Dec, and I don't know whether you, like me, sometimes forget that they've also grown up too, and it's perfectly normal, natural. There's no patronising, oh, look at them, they're light entertainment. I love people who refuse to stay in their lane. Why the hell shouldn't they do politics? What do you talk about down the pub? Your job and nothing else? No, exactly. But that if I were a Daily Telegraph or Daily Mail or a Sun or Daily Express journalist on the political side of things, I'd be thinking, how did it come to this? How have I ended up being outflanked on political analysis by Ant and Dec, while they're presenting I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and I'm writing 1,000 words on the latest Downing Street debacle? Strange times we live in. Gerald's in Lewisham. Gerald, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
James, I've been stewing on this for about a week.
Good.
And for me, it's not even the lie. It's not so much the party. It's the fact that they so nearly got away with it. I don't mean to make it sound like Scooby-Doo, but they nearly got away with it.
You totally did, and you know it. If it wasn't for those pesky kids.
No, look, it's... I watched PMQs last week, and afterwards Starmer had gone at Johnson a couple of times. Johnson had issued his no rules are broken nonsense. His last flurry was to mention that Labour just want mass uncontrolled immigration.
Yeah.
And I thought, what has that got to do with it? But it's obvious. That's the distraction. That's how we've got here, because we've got a press who are married to people in government. Mm-hmm. They're friends of people in government who are going to protect them. And then in return, we've got a government who will protect the press, as they have done this week by announcing a new fight against judges. Yeah. Coincidentally, after the Mail lose their appeal against Meghan Markle.
I don't know that those two are linked, but what you say is true.
Well,
the chronology of what you say is true, but I don't know if I would personally link those two together. The rest of it is bang on. I mean, the cabal is the only word one can really reach for when you think about how closely intertwined these people are.
Yeah, we're locked out of it. We've got people up until a few days ago still saying, oh, well, this is just Westminster tittle-tattle, because that's how it's being presented to us. And, I mean, what do we do when the people who are meant to be holding truth to power are using their power to hide the truth from us? We need a second Leveson inquiry, and it needs to go into... I don't know if
you heard the news today. There's another round of phone hacking victims who've received compensation from Rupert Murdoch's company. So it's interesting that you mentioned that today. That story dropped this morning.
But interestingly, they're receiving compensation, but we're not finding... It's not being broadcast on front pages.
Well, it wouldn't be, would it? I mean, it'd be a bit like you walking around in a sandwich board saying that you did something naughty last Friday.
Yeah, and I don't know how to break that. But I mean, first things first, this government has to go. I think the whole cabinet really, with one or two
They're not going
exceptions.
anywhere. They're not going anywhere. I mean, I'll tell you that for nothing. Not now. They might do eventually. This might prove to be a hole below the waterline, but they'll be bailing it out as we speak. I mean, think of Barnard Castle. That's probably the most helpful lens through which to examine this story. They are looking for a way that they can... I don't think it will work because the Brexit blindfold's not there anymore, but I don't want to go down the B-word route today for once. I don't think it will work because they haven't got that magic beans of Brexit to throw at the British public, but they will be looking today for something they can say, Darryl. Whether it's true or not, I think we can all agree, ceased to matter about 2 years ago.
What they're going to do, they're going to make it about this single issue rather than painting this single issue as emblematic of a wider problem. So if you can get people to focus on just this particular lie and find someone to blame for this, be it Allegra Stratton, or even if it is Boris Johnson.
Well, that'll be interesting. That'll be interesting because Allegra Stratton is married to James Forsyth, who's the political editor of The Spectator, and has...
That's what I thought was interesting.
Dominic Cummings is married to Mary Wakefield, who's the deputy editor of The Spectator. Rishi Sunak is best friends with James Forsyth. They're godparents to each other's children. They were best men at each other's wedding. And the ex-boyfriend of Carrie Symonds, Boris Johnson's current wife, is now the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole, who used to work for one of the far-right hate sites. You know, which thread do you pull?
All of them.
Well, we shall see. We shall see. Or is it going to be another kind of, well, nothing to see here. We'll find something, not a dead cat. I'm finding that analysis unhelpful, but a big smoke and mirrors is perhaps a more helpful analogy. And this plan B coming forward, there's going to be passports, there's going to be more working from home. We're bringing in plan B. That could see the spotlight shift. And I stress again, the Sun newspaper reportedly had its own party on December the 18th, so they're unlikely to be coming for the Prime Minister anytime soon. I don't know whether or not you're interested in such matters, but I had my booster jab yesterday, I'm delighted to report, but I am feeling a little bit green around the gills today. I hope it hasn't been detectable from my performance on the Great British Radio Show, but I am, just to let you know, when the nurse, because last time I was golden. Mrs O'Brien was ill for a week with her first one. So I had 2 AstraZenecas and now I've had a Pfizer. And the nurse said, or the vaccinator said, you may feel a bit fluey for a day or two. And on this occasion, she was dead right, giving you a heads up. My colleague Ben upstairs had exactly the same hat trick, 2 AstraZenecas and a Pfizer in a pear tree. And he was absolutely fine. So it's luck of the draw, I think. It is, actually, it was my colleague Bob. No, Ben was like me. You think I'm making it out now, Bob and Ben. It's true. All we need is a bill and a little weed and we got the full set. No, Ben, like me, was ill for a few hours, so I'm hoping that it will pass before I have a wonderful carol concert to attend and indeed to host this evening. I won't be doing any Jacob Rees-Mogg style jokes. And a few of you pointing out, you can't quite believe that the audience he was addressing with his performative callousness was supposedly a charity. I don't know what the definition of charity is in his dictionary. But that's an interesting approach to take to an organisation that is ostensibly a charity, isn't it? Jokes about regulations and rules brought in to help keep human beings alive and healthy. But 22 after 11 is the time. Just a little heads up there. Booster news. Let's go to Kathy, who's in Durham. Kathy, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm going to start by disagreeing with something you said.
Good. It's about time someone did.
3 or 4 calls. Yeah,
Carry on.
Unfortunately, and don't disagree with you that much.
Carry on.
You mentioned that this was possibly the most egregious political debacle in the last, in living memory, I think you said.
Yeah, that was a little bit. That was perhaps a little over the top. Everyone's
I can remember the Owen Paterson affair that was only a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I can remember the prorogation of Parliament. That's just 2 off the top of my head.
Barnard Castle.
This one's more emotional.
That's the word. Yes, it feels worse, doesn't it? It's the what is it? It's the secrecy of it. They stood up and did it in plain sight with Owen Paterson, and so it somehow. Well, I don't know why.
I disagree. This is my point. I don't think they've done any of it secretly. I am absolutely amazed by the people that are calling in and by people that I know who voted for Boris Johnson. We have known Boris Johnson. I'm 52. I've grown up with Boris Johnson in the background.
Yeah.
On Have I Got News for You, as a politician, as Mayor of London. We know what he is. It's not possible to have grown up in this country and not known that he's a duplicitous, facile, self-serving politician.
Okay.
I do not understand why people are surprised by any of this.
He wins elections.
Yes, that's
and the people that back him because he wins elections, they don't necessarily argue with your analysis of him. I can't drop any names at this point, but I have, on the rare occasions that I venture out into the wild, because I don't like socialising with politicians for reasons like today, you see, because it means that if you have to apply the thumbscrews on air, either in person or just in broadcast, the way I was raised, I kind of feel a bit guilty about it, Kathy. I feel a bit bad, so I don't knock about with politicians ever. There's no earthly way you'd ever find me at a party at Downing Street, whoever the Prime Minister was, but I have had Conservative MPs quietly whisper in my ear that they are not a million miles away from your analysis of Boris Johnson, but they say there's not a great deal they can do about it.
No, and I'm not actually blaming those politicians because they're politicians. I am blaming the electorate. I'm sorry, I grew up in the same country they did. I held my nose and voted for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, and that was difficult because he was a terrible, terrible politician.
Yep.
I'm not going to go into the reasons. I disagreed with him on many things.
Sure. Well, you don't. All you need to point out was that it was clear to anybody with their eyes open that he was going to suffer a catastrophic loss in 2019, and then
Yes,
lo and behold, he did, and it's all the fault of the people who knew it was going to happen.
Yes, I agree. But on the other hand, positively voting for Boris Johnson, the Darius Guppy affair began it all, I suppose. His impingement on my consciousness.
Right.
And this was at a time when we laughed at other countries for having Silvio Berlusconi or Ronald Reagan.
Is that your smoke alarm in the background?
I'm afraid so.
That's fine. No, look, I'm just checking. I'm making sure you change that battery after this programme. I want to
Actually, in fact, it's... no, I'm not going to go into my...
No, that's fine.
details.
But the catalogue, which I often unveil, I often run through it on the programme. I had to stop, actually, because it was getting a little bit Groundhog Day-ish. You find it staggering that he didn't just tell us who he was the first time. He told us the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the 500th time, and people still cling to the idea that he's one of them and he's a good chap and he's good old Boris.
I find it absolutely unbelievable. He's been sacked from at least 2 jobs that we know of for lying, one of which was in government, one of which was as a journalist. He's the person that began the whole Bendy Bananas debacle.
He did, yes, but that's part of the appeal, I think. A lot of people aren't ready yet to surrender the nonsenses that he persuaded them of when he was the Daily Telegraph's man in Brussels. That's a large part of why he got elected in 2019, of course. It's all of why he got the leadership in earlier that year.
I would like to just put in a small defence of some BBC journalists. Ian Hislop, for instance. I know he's not a journalist. He's an entertainer.
You're right. We shouldn't. Giving all the plaudits to Anton Deck, but Hislop goes in hard every week on Have I Got News for You. I'm going to have to bid you goodbye because that smoke alarm is driving me absolutely potty.
I'm not surprised.
Is it a PP3? Do you need a PP3? Is that what you need?
It's actually wired in.
Is it?
Not quite sure.
Oh well, then it's still got a battery in it. It's got a battery in it for when you get a power cut.
It still works as a smoke alarm when I burn toast.
Yes, but it's running out of power. No, this is important public service broadcasting. This is like in the old days when they used to interrupt the news to say, can Kathy in Durham please ring home immediately? You have a battery in your wired-in smoke alarm in case there's a power cut. So you need to change the battery.
I will. I promise.
You don't sound so... You need a PP3. It'll almost certainly be a PP3 battery. And it's not funny, Kathy, and you need to change it now, not least because there's a sort of weird kind of water torture type effect to your contributions to the programme with that beeping in the background.
I do apologise for that.
No,
it didn't occur to me. I could have gone into another room.
I'm only teasing you, but get it fixed. Get a battery. Get a PP3.
Will do.
Thank you. Take care. 11:28, Kathy and her smoke alarm there in Durham. Grant's in Sheffield. Grant, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello,
well, the reason I've called is, we have spoken before, but I'm a magistrate in Sheffield.
Oh, yeah.
And I did look back on my diary, and I was sat in court all day on the 18th of December last year.
What sort of cases were you listening to?
Well, unsurprisingly, we spent the last year with a COVID court at least once a week, if not twice a week at the height.
Yeah.
And the last time I sat on one was about 3 weeks ago. And,
still prosecuting people for breaking the rules back in December of last year.
Absolutely. Still prosecuting people for December, January, February, March. And with the new announcements, obviously, there's going to be some new ones starting pretty soon.
Yeah.
And how realistically, because whatever people think about magistrates, some people have different feelings for them.
Depends whether they're guilty or not.
Well, yeah, they don't tend to like us very much. But they're generally people with integrity, generally people that are doing it for service purposes rather than anything else. And realistically, we're finding people for 2 people in a car that are from different households.
Wow.
We're finding people for more than 6 in a household where they're having a party or they're having some kind of gathering. We're finding people in shisha bars. We're finding...
Still, this is missing, isn't it? Because Jim Pickard at the FT actually points out that 2,000 people have been prosecuted at Westminster Magistrates Court for ignoring lockdowns, attending parties and breaking quarantine.
I've tried to do it. If we average 50 cases a week, which I know at the height we were doing more than that, but there's 2,500 people just in Sheffield there.
That's incredible.
And you extrapolate that across the country, we're talking about we're going to be over 100,000 people that have been fined for some kind of COVID breach.
Which they find funny.
And they just stand and laugh. And
it's incredible.
How can we, with any real integrity...
Will it make your job harder? How do you deal now with someone who stands up in the... Do you have a dock in a magistrate's court? I want to get the Parliament.
Yeah.
So someone stands up in the dock and said, I didn't do anything that the Downing Street lot didn't do.
The other problem we've got is most of the COVID cases are done through a single justice procedure.
Right.
Which in itself is basically a spreadsheet that we go through.
And just tick it off and say, right, that's you. Yeah.
Unless people particularly choose to go to court, they don't get an open court hearing.
Mm.
It's dealt with on a almost like a speeding fine.
Yeah, and
I mean, what can you say to somebody that says, "Well, we didn't do what the Prime Minister did, or what Jacob Rees-Mogg did, or..."
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg thinks it's funny. Why am I in court?
And with the best will in the world, quite a lot of the people that come to court, for whatever reason, are a bit worldly wise. They might not operate under the same rules that we do all the time.
I understand.
But they watch the news.
Of course they do.
They hear the radio, you know.
I do.
Absolutely, are they going to walk into court
I hadn't
now
thought of that. It's a fascinating
and
angle.
say, we didn't... There were only 2 of us in a car.
Yeah, so there was 30 people having cheese and wine at Downing Street.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
And
how can you realistically say to somebody that's £200 fine or a £500 fine or a £10,000 fine for an organiser?
I do not know. I genuinely don't know. I hadn't even thought. I mean, I'd clocked what Jim Pickard said about the 2,000 at Westminster Magistrates Court because it's just over the way from where the party in Downing Street would have been. But that's your job. You do it out. I mean, you don't do it for the money, do you, Grant? You do it out of a sense of public duty, I think, being a magistrate. And the idea that the Downing Street has chopped you off at the knees as an arbiter of the law.
There's a court in Sheffield every week, and there's a court in Hull every week in our justice section that just does COVID.
That's still going on, still dealing with this backlog. In fact, one of the things I forgot to mention to you earlier in the week when we were talking about that ludicrous middle-class drug users smoke and mirror business was that county lines cases now, according to my legal sources, are taking 3 or 4 years to come to court. So the idea that they can suddenly start clamping down hard on that sort of thing is laughable. It's almost as if there is no relationship whatsoever between what they say and what is real. And now Grant is the one that has to pick up the pieces of the latest betrayal of the truth. Not you, not Boris Johnson. Well, actually, in a sense, all of us, but not him. Not yet. We'll see. I might just run through the clips again, actually, or at least 2 of them, the 2 most egregious. I don't think we need any more of PJ and Duncan singing "Let's Get Ready to Rumble." Should we make that a little tradition? So, like, every now and then, when there's a huge story and people are kind enough to take to Twitter from about lunchtime yesterday to say, "I can't wait for James's show tomorrow. I can't wait for James's show tomorrow," which is like manna from heaven for my undernourished ego. On those days, we had it with... Barnard Castle as well. I actually came back when I was supposed to be off on the day of Barnard Castle, and that sense we can't wait to get stuck into it together is almost overwhelming. So we might save the "Let's Get Ready to Rumble" clip for those very rare. If we end up doing it more than once or twice a year, I think we'll have a problem. And then Anton Deck, of course, landing some very meaningful and effective punches on the Prime Minister last night while presenting "I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here." As I said earlier, I find I don't know, if I was a cheerleader for Boris Johnson, if I had encouraged you to, let's leave the B word out of it, but if I'd encouraged you to believe that he's a good egg, or that he's a stand-up guy, or that he's, doing his best, or that it's all... quite how I'd process the news today, coupled with the knowledge that Anton Deck have knocked you into a cocked hat as a political commentator. Again, no reason why they shouldn't do. But you'd be looking to your lines a bit, wouldn't you? So let's do Stratton and Rees-Mogg before Theo joins us after the next break. Then we'll talk to Louise and we'll talk to Alice and may well talk to you as well. But I think it's important to get some reminders of the context in place, albeit that according to the latest listening figures, you now stay tuned pretty much for the duration of the show. It's marvellous, but I do need to recognise that you may be joining me a little later. You may have been busy this morning. Here's Allegra Stratton on December the 22nd describing or responding to questions about a party that her boss and the man who appointed her to the job as official spokesperson has publicly insisted, or at least his spokesman have publicly insisted, that this party never took place. So listen to it, and if it never took place, the only gaps you have to fill in are the gaps marked, well, if it didn't took place, why didn't you just say so?
I've just seen reports on Twitter that there was a Downing Street Christmas party on Friday night. Do you recognise those reports?
I went home. Hold on.
Would the Prime Minister condone having a Christmas party?
What's the answer?
I don't know.
It wasn't a party, it was cheese and wine.
Clear, it's not.
Is cheese and wine all right?
No.
It's a business meeting.
I'm joking.
It is recorded. This fictional party was a business meeting. And it was not socially distanced.
Hilarious. Now, you might be able to excuse that, given that a year has passed, and as Dominic Raab said earlier this week, the police don't investigate things that happened over a year ago, but you probably wouldn't have been laughing about it on Monday night.
I see we're all here obeying regulations, aren't we? I mean, this party is not going to be investigated by the police in a year's time. You are all very carefully socially distanced. We've moved, I'm pleased to tell you, from the metric back to the imperial system. I know you were at least 2 inches away, which is, as I understand it, what the regulations require during the social distancing period.
Hilarious. Back to the phones. Louise is in Rugby. Louise, what would you like to say?
I just can't quite describe the anger I think most people feel just about the complete contempt that the government has for everybody and just the complete lack of respect for everything that everyone has gone through. My son died in May of last year. He was 14. He didn't die from COVID. He died from leukemia. It was in the middle of the first lockdown. It was horrendous. Obviously, a horrendous situation was made 10 times worse. His younger brother wasn't allowed to see him. Our family weren't allowed to see him. His funeral was 10 people. We still haven't been able to organise anything after that because everything has just been so uncertain. Last Christmas was obviously our first Christmas without him. We weren't able to see any family. We weren't able to see any friends. Our son was off school for months, so was taken away from all of his friends. Yeah. And we were prepared to do all of that. And we were prepared to go through all of that because that was what was required. And that was what was required to protect other people. We have friends who last year was their child's last Christmas. Yeah. And the fact that they can have a party, and it's not even whether it was in the rules, even if it was within the rules, they shouldn't have been having a party. It's just unbelievable. And I think it's just, everything is just about not what is right, but what they can get away with. If they can squirm out of it on a technicality, they will do. And they are supposed to be the leaders of this country.
That's the bit, isn't it, that we need to keep reminding ourselves of, is that they're supposed to be in charge. No one's used the phrase lead by example today because it's so laughable, the very idea that they could lead by example after what they've done. I mean, you keep using the word unbelievable, and I completely understand why. It's almost as if we're in a parallel universe. It's so hard to get your head around. Laughing about it is the thing, I think. More so, for me at least, Louise, than the party itself.
No, absolutely. And you know, you can kind of... you can kind of understand the situation that it's like we've all had a hard year. Yes. The last day in the office. So look, there's something on your desk.
Yes.
Or something like that. You can understand that, but that's clearly not what happened. And they
the accusation was that it was organised on WhatsApp and that they had a secret Santa, which speaks of quite a lot of planning, doesn't it? It's not some impromptu Prosecco with plastic cups, I don't think. But
no, absolutely not. And even if Boris Johnson wasn't there, the number of things that have happened in the past year that is just about the culture of that government. And that every single person in that government behaves in the same way, whether it's Matt Hancock or Dominic Cummings or Allegra Stratton or anyone.
We can do what we want. We can do what we want.
Absolutely.
I don't quite know how you develop that. I've got my theory of Hogwarts because the architecture and the rarefied environments of the House of Commons make people think that they're wizards and witches, you know. It's so magical sometimes when you go there that it gives them incredibly inflated ideas of their own importance. I think perhaps being elected on the back of one of the most dishonest political campaigns that the English-speaking world has ever seen gave them a very strained relationship with reality and the truth. But all of this is about truth and untruth. It's not about finding it funny. Finding it funny.
Everything they do has no consequence.
Never. Rees-Mogg actually tried to rip up the parliamentary rule book to save his mate who had broken all the rules. And he's still leader of the House of Commons. He lied to the Queen. He lied to the Queen.
Lied to the Queen.
Good God. Not even the biggest Republican in the country would be comfortable with people lying to the Queen, but there he is, still in his job.
And there are no resigning matters anymore.
No, you can't. I mean, Hancock resigned because he thought he'd run out of road, but he was never going to get sacked, because the minute Johnson introduces standards that other people are expected to abide by, the questions of why he doesn't abide by them himself become clamorous, Louise. Clamorous. I'm so sorry for your loss. I really am.
Thank you.
I just can't quite, you know, I've got kids of a similar age, and I can't imagine the compounding of your misery and your sadness by circumstance, and then the compounding of that by the knowledge that the people in charge were behaving so contemptuously. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Look after yourself.
I will do.
Thank you, Louise. Theo Usherwood is with us, so I shall spare you the summons, but I might take one more call from Sheffield, partly because that's where my mum's from. To be honest with you, I've got such a soft spot for Sheffield, but we seem to be taking a lot of calls from there today. And of course, Sean Bean is in the news as the latest recipient of damages or compensation after having his phone hacked by the News of the World. It's just one of those days where the planets really align, isn't it? God, Rupert Murdoch never bounced back from that, did he? Anyway, and then we'll catch up with Theo, although I don't think we'll detain him unduly on the question of what do you think Keir Starmer will open with in PMQs, which we will take live, as always, on shortly after 12 noon. Sean's in Sheffield. Sean, what would you like to say? It's not that Sean, is it?
No. It's a different Sean, although I do often get told I sound like Sean Bean.
Well, you do.
There you go.
What do you want to say, mate?
Just today, James, I'm a little bit nervous. It's the first time I've actually called.
Okay.
I've texted a couple of times and stuff, so bear with me.
Of course.
So Mum died on the 9th of March last year, and we were unable to have a proper funeral. The four of us, myself, my dad, my brother and sister, were the only ones that could attend. And it then took us 18 months almost to organise a memorial for her because of all the restrictions and for various reasons. And my dad, last year, spent the first Christmas without his wife of 53 years, by himself, because we followed the guidelines, because we stuck to the rules and did what we need to do to keep everybody and each other safe. And it feels like, along with many other things, we have been kicked in the teeth. And I know I'm not my own. I tweeted this last night, and the response, over 100 people have responded with similar stories to mine of how people have suffered, and it's abysmal, James. It's abysmal that we've been put through 2 years of tomfoolery, of inadequacy, of lack of compassion from this sort of braying clan of I don't know what it is. I can't think of a word to describe them that I would get away with on radio. I can't lie.
Thank you for censoring yourself in advance. That's me that gets into trouble, not you.
I'll be honest. I don't normally. But anybody who knows me will be able to corroborate that.
Oh, I hear you. But it is sometimes the words don't. You need more, don't you? You need a vocabulary that can extend a little further than normal.
I think the thing for me today, James, is that it's brought back a lot of my anger and it's brought back a lot of the hurt and upset.
That your dad did what was right, and spent his first Christmas as a widower on his own, 52 years of marriage, didn't even have his boys with him,
and so
and they had a party, and then 4 days later they laughed about it.
And they're still laughing, James.
And Jacob Rees-Mogg and his mates at the Institute of Economic Affairs are still laughing about it now. Mate,
100%. 100%. What I want from Keir Starmer today is the last thing I want is for him to stand up and ask for an apology.
Need more, don't you?
Well, yeah, it's time. It's time to take this cabal down. It's time to rip into them and just open up and let loose on them, because I can almost hear them laughing now. I can almost hear the laughter that will be coming from the Tory benches during PMQs today.
It's going to be very interesting, because I tell you what, even if you were a fully paid up member of the fan club today, if he's going to bring in Plan B, you're going to be furious about that. If you're fighting a marginal seat, you're going to have people like you marching up to you when you're out on the stump saying, how come you all had a party? Well, my dad was all on his own. I mean, one wonders just how far you can stretch these bonds of loyalty when the person that you're being loyal to treats the electorate with, I mean, it's beyond contempt now. I'm struggling like you are to find the right words. I don't need to swear. I'm looking for a descriptive word rather than a noun. I'm looking for, I mean, what would the word be? What do you need? Why would we never do this in a million years? Why would we never?
Because we're decent, James.
They can't all be indecent, can they? You know what Stockholm Syndrome is? You know what...
Exactly, yeah. I don't even think... Well, you're right. It's beyond contempt. I think it's a point where, literally, he doesn't actually care about anything. It's almost nihilistic.
Yeah.
His lack of care.
That's the word I want. I think that's the word I want. I think you're right. It is. Well, accept himself. Accept himself. Accept his status. He doesn't care about anything except, his... what you'd call it, popularity, status, survival. I genuinely don't know. I think it was Marina Hyde who said that thing about he loves everything about being Prime Minister except being Prime Minister. Sean, thank you, mate. I tell you, hey, how was that then for a debut? That didn't go badly, did it?
That was all right. If I can just lighten the mood,
go on, of course you
before
can.
I go.
Absolutely.
So I'm in a band. We're called the Heavily Pregnant Brothers. Look us up on YouTube.
Well played.
We have our annual Christmas gig, and ironically enough, it's on the 18th of December.
Oh, Lordy. Well, I don't know whether you'll be having that one now. We'll find out later. That's a great name, though, for the Heavily Pregnant Brothers. Sean, take care. Still plenty of people waiting to talk to me. In fact, Keir Starmer today could have chosen any one of our callers, couldn't he, to drive home the sacrifices that voters were making while Downing Street staff were partying. And before we just pick over the bones of what we've just heard, Theo, Dominic Cummings is tweeting again.
Yes, Dominic Cummings has just tweeted to ask to raise a party in the flat. This is what he alleges on November the 13th. Let me just dig out the exact tweet where he says, and this, of course, Prime Minister's Chief Advisor, will the CABSEC, that's Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, also be asked to investigate the flat party on Friday, 13th of November, the other flat parties and the flats bubble policy?
I've just done a Google. How old am I? No, because the 13th of November rang a bell with me.
Yeah. Why?
Why might it ring a bell with Dominic Cummings?
Day he left Downing
Street.
The day
he left Downing Street, they threw a party.
But you know the.
Sorry, carry on.
So of course he puts in stars. What does it mean? People put stars around a word?
It's just emphasis.
Emphasis, right? It's a flat party. So that's in the Prime Minister's flat, not in the. So yes.
Good Lord, I can't believe that. I mean, that's what I've got. I've got the 13th of November. At 5:43, that picture of him backlit, deliberately coming out the front door with his big box, and there is a reason why he would be particularly interested. They threw a party. Went, oh, bless his little cock.
But the inference from what he's saying is that Carrie Johnson threw a party.
Of course, yes.
Prime Minister's wife, because the party was in the flat,
and she is widely regarded to have orchestrated his defenestration.
Yes.
Shall we have a listen to the bit we missed? The opening
probably
comments from Boris Johnson just 20 or so minutes ago.
Mr. Speaker, may I begin by saying that I understand and share the anger up and down the country at seeing Number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I I was also furious to see that clip. And Mr. Speaker, I apologise unreservedly for the offence that it has caused up and down the country, and I apologise for the impression that it gives. But I repeat, Mr. Speaker, that I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured. But I have asked the Cabinet Secretary to establish all the facts and to report back as soon as possible. And, Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that if those rules were broken, then there will be disciplinary action for all those involved.
He, by the end of PMQs, of course, that contrition had completely disappeared, and he was claiming that the Labour Party shouldn't be focusing upon things that happened a year ago.
But there is a gap now between what Boris Johnson said in that opening remarks there, where he said he's been repeatedly assured that there wasn't a party, and what Number 10 has been saying up until now by saying there wasn't a party. So what Boris Johnson is doing is creating himself some wriggle room by saying, I've received the assurances that there wasn't a party, but obviously he said he was furious when he watched that video of Allegra Stratton seemingly making light of the fact that there was a party, and this is how she would defend it if she found herself in a White House-style press briefing. And of course, that's why Boris Johnson said he's now asked the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, that's the most senior civil servant within Number 10, to investigate whether there was a party in Number 10, and that if anybody is found to have breached the COVID rules by being at that party, then disciplinary action will be taken. So in effect, he is throwing his staff under the bus by saying, if you've been to this party that's proved, then you will face disciplinary action.
I mean, he lives in Downing Street. It's his house. It's his home.
Yes.
So this is a bit like if your wife or your son were to have a party in your home, you could reasonably claim that you were completely ignorant of it.
Well, no,
it's a bit bigger than your gaff.
Yes, it is.
But it's not in the flat, but the building.
That's why Dominic Cummings mentioned the flat.
Yes.
So unfortunately, at my house, I don't have an atrium. I don't have offices.
You need to work harder.
And I don't then have living quarters. So I have a house. So it is possible that Boris Johnson
30 of your closest colleagues having a bit of a knees up in the building where you live, but you were completely, supremely unaware of it.
Boris Johnson could have been in the flat, and there could have been a party downstairs that he was unaware of.
Could have been in the fridge. He's fond of fridges, isn't he, when the going gets
Could have been in his study. He could have been somewhere else in the building. It's a very large
30 or
building.
40 of his closest colleagues having their knees up in the house, in the building where he lives, and he is going to try and claim complete ignorance of it.
He's received the repeated assurances that there wasn't a party. But interestingly, he also said that the findings of the inquiry that's been set up now by Simon Case would be passed. And this was a question Keir Starmer brought up, which was quite interesting because Keir Starmer, for actually quite a rare occasion, managed to think on his feet.
Yes.
And he managed to ask a question based on what the Prime Minister had said and got the Prime Minister on the record to commit to the fact that the findings of this inquiry will be passed to the Metropolitan Police. And of course, you've heard now from the Met saying they're taking this a little bit more seriously given the emergence of the video, saying that they're going to review it. It's not simply a case of Cressida reading letters of complaint. That will obviously, the findings of the case review will go to the Met as well.
You better go and check what's happened since we started picking over the bones, because possibly he's already been asked about that November the 13th party. Obviously, Twitter is not a completely reliable testament. And could you see what David Warburton asked as well? Because I tweeted about my mum, oddly, at the weekend, not getting her booster. And David Warburton, who's the Conservative MP for Somerset and Frome, said he was going to ask a question about it at PMQs, not because of me or my mum, because he was already aware of many of his constituents struggling with that. So I think a lot of my listeners would be interested. See if someone asked him about November the 13th, on what I think could be fairly described as a relatively remarkable day of politics. The secret barrister puts it rather well, as is often the case. What's so hard to understand, he or she writes. He is sickened by the party that didn't happen, and which, if it did happen, definitely broke no rules, which is why he will hold an inquiry and hand over evidence that doesn't exist to the Met, and if you question any of that, you're playing politics. I mean, that was pathetic. That was objectively pathetic. The attempt to accuse Keir Starmer of playing politics when he wants to know whether or not the law was broken in Downing Street. Pardon? Was the law broken in that? Have you lied to the British public all week? Stop playing politics. And blah, 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 something about immigration. Quite incredible, actually. I don't know. I can't do it every day. I'm tempted to, as you know, every morning, just to ask, do you get it yet? Do you see it yet? Are you with me yet? But that would be boring and self-aggrandising. But my goodness me, how much more evidence would you really need? And I think I'm right about November the 13th, which Dominic Cummings is very cross about. Will the CABSEC, the Cabinet Secretary, also be asked to investigate the, quotes, flat end, quotes, party on Friday the 13th of November, the other flat parties and the flat bubble policy, the 13th of November being the day when Dominic Cummings was handed his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap, and when, if his complaint on Twitter 21 minutes ago is to be believed, the Prime Minister's current wife, Carrie Symonds, responded, well, in a very Jamie Vardy-like fashion. 12:36 is the time. Take a few more calls on this. The phone lines are open, 0345 60 60973. A lot of you pointing out he was actually furious to see that clip, not because of what had happened, but because it had gone out. And I think that's probably true. What's he going to do? He's going to do what he always does. He's going to say whatever he has to say to get out of the shortest term trouble imaginable. This is how his marriages have been conducted. It's how his journalistic career has been conducted. It's how his mayoralty was conducted. It's how his dealings with Jennifer Arcuri have been conducted. He will say whatever needs to be said to just get over the next line. And then he'll pick himself up, dust himself down, and wait for the next self-inflicted catastrophe. You, me, everybody else, we're just collateral damage. We're just bit part players in the psychodrama of Boris Johnson's epic existence. And if you don't believe me, or you don't think that stands up to scrutiny, then I've got a bridge I'd like to sell you, because this is all he ever does. So now it looks like he's going to throw his colleagues under the bus for having a party that he's spent all week claiming not to know about, or that didn't happen. Now there looks to be proof that it did happen. He's left with little choice but to pivot. You remember my theory of heads and tails. Shout heads and tails, and then however the coin lands, you can claim victory. So there was a party, there was no party. There was a party, but it didn't break the rules. There was no party, but if there was a party, it didn't break the rules. I don't know if there was a party, but the people who went to the party assured me that it didn't break the rules. And then out comes that despicable footage of Allegra Stratton and colleagues, not just her, by the way, although she was, I think, the most senior person in the room, laughing at the thought of being busted for having a party. 12:37 is the time. Alice is in Birmingham. Alice, you've been hanging around for ages. I do apologise. We got rather overtaken by events. What would you like to say?
I don't really know where to start, except to come at this from a very different angle from the rest of your callers. We're very lucky in that we haven't lost anybody close to us.
Yeah.
You know, I'm absolutely heartbroken listening to the calls that have come in this morning, but the angle that I'm coming at this from is one of policing the restrictions that were in place last year. I'm not a police officer. I'm a civilian member of staff.
Okay.
And I work in the police force control room.
Okay.
And as part of that job, as taking those 101 and 999 calls, we also processed the many, many thousands of reports that we took about the breaches of the COVID rules.
Well, Priti Patel told us to report our neighbours or friends who were having parties.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And every police force had a platform and a voice encouraging people to do so. Such was the importance of maintaining, you know, the public safety. And our police officers went out in their thousands, hundreds of thousands, to explain and engage and encourage and enforce the guidance and the restrictions and the rules and the laws that were in place. And I think that the situation we're in now, looking at Omicron with the possibility of the ramping up of restrictions, I think this has placed our police officers in an even more difficult position to try and police and to enforce this. At a time
for the same reason that Grant, the magistrate up in Sheffield, said, how can we uphold the law when it would appear that the building where the Prime Minister sleeps hosted a party that broke it?
Well, they will uphold the law.
I know that. Well, they'll try.
Well, they will. They will go out and they will use all of the tools in their armoury to do so. But I think they've made the policing position incredible. I'm sorry, that's my little one in the background.
That's all right.
They've made the position of the police very, very difficult at a time that's already understandably difficult for policing. From a personal point of view, I received emails explaining that it was expected of us that we adhered to all guidance. We weren't allowed to car share with colleagues who were going to the same place of work, working in the same room as us. And there was an expectation on us, having formed a support bubble with a very, very vulnerable single mum and her son with profound mental health difficulties, that would be reported to professional standards to avoid being reported and investigated for a possible breach of those requirements on us. So we were being held to an incredibly high level of expectation of adherence to those restrictions. I worked on Christmas Day last year, so there was no Christmas Day bubble for my family. There was just my family. We didn't spend Christmas with anybody else. There was no dispensation to do that on another day. So we saw none of our family over Christmas last year, and such was the same for many emergency service workers and key workers. There just wasn't the opportunity to do that, and so this feels like an absolute smack in the face.
Which bit? Which bit offends you the most?
All of it.
Fair
I think that the breach that happened, the lies that have been told, and the laughing at us. I mean, you talked about leading by example, and
Well, you can't, can you? You can't.
And well, we will. That's the point is they didn't.
Oh, no, you will, but he can't. How can he lead by? He hasn't been able to lead by example from the start. What was the first intervention you can remember him making? Talking about how he'd been shaking hands with COVID patients in hospital.
It just absolutely appalls me. I don't have sufficient words that are broadcastable and that might not put my job in a difficult position to share with you today about how I feel about this. And I know that going on to my rostered shift over the next few weeks, we're already taking those reported breaches, and we're already receiving reports that people are not wearing their face coverings where they should be wearing them. And that just puts the police in a really difficult position. I think the vast majority of people will still adhere to guidelines and to restrictions.
I'm fascinated by the psychology. I've been fascinated from the very start. I don't think anybody, or hardly anybody, is perfect. Everybody has perhaps had an accidental misstep or just failed to dot all the I's and cross the T's. But I don't know, I genuinely don't know, we may talk about this tomorrow, Alice, whether or not people, I think once it reaches the point where the police are turning up or people are in magistrates' courts, then they're going to play merry hell about the fact that they seem to be held to laws that Downing Street's allowed to break. But for the average Joe, I don't think they're going to be more likely to behave irresponsibly, but I could be completely wrong about that.
No, I think you're right. I think the average Joe is going to behave as responsibly as they did. But
for the same reasons we did last time, to help each other and to keep each other safe.
But I think that those that were minded to not behave responsibly, this is going to be a handshake to them, isn't it? This is going to feel like, well, we don't have to because they didn't, and if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us.
And certainly the people who have been rendered rather paranoid and unhappy by talk of COVID passports, this is going to give them an awful lot of ammunition with which to try to undermine public health, isn't it, and the national good.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe so. I can't imagine the difficulty that the police are going to face now trying to manage any ramping up of restrictions. I know we're talking about a potential plan B later today, but anything further than that is going to be increasingly difficult. I don't think there's sufficient public appetite now, given what we've all heard, to support, more strenuous restrictions.
What did you think when Dominic Raab? Yes, I agree. Final question, because I'm watching the clock. What did you think when Dominic Raab said earlier this week that the police generally don't investigate things that happened a year ago?
He should come and sit next to me, because I process.
Be careful
crime
what you
reports.
wish for, Alice.
Yeah, I process crime reports every day. Not every crime has an officer deployed out to it. Some of those crimes are actually processed in-house in the force control room and allocated to investigating officers. And we take what we call non-recent reports of all manner, of all kinds, and they are investigated. And so I would question whether Dominic Raab is in a position that he's capable of performing adequately, and whether or not he should be going out on national TV and national radio and saying things that are demonstrably untrue. I think he needs to consider his position.
A fish rots from the head down, Alice, as we all know. Thank you.
It certainly does. But no, thank you for all that you're doing and for shining a light on this
Actually,
and for
do you know, it's
continuing
quite
to
easy.
apply pressure.
It's quite easy. You're very kind, and I'll take the compliments all the way to the bank. But, I mean, if they keep behaving like this, all I have to do is describe it with an occasional. I do allow myself an occasional, oh, what a surprise, if only someone had warned you. But it is not difficult, not challenging. These are not the days when I earn my money. The days I earn my money when there's no news at all. And I can't remember a day like that in the last few years. 12:45 is the time. Alice, thank you for everything you do, which is obviously measurably more important than my daily burblings.